Have you ever been told you don't belong even when you've earned every right to be there? Imagine walking up to board your first-class seat, ticket in hand, only to be stopped, questioned, and humiliated. Not because of paperwork, but because of the color of your skin. That's what happened to Jonathan King, a black CEO who had built his success with discipline, empathy, and quiet strength. In that moment, he faced a choice: walk away in silence, or stand firm and confront a system that had thrived on keeping people like him out. What would you do if it were you? Would you swallow the pain to avoid a scene or risk everything to demand dignity, not just for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been told, you don't belong here? This story isn't just about one man being denied a seat. It's about what happened when he made one phone call that shook an entire airline, and how courage, truth, and justice can ripple far beyond a boarding gate. Stay with us. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope, and don't forget to subscribe because this is a story you won't want to miss. The terminal at Chicago O'Hare International Airport buzzed with its usual morning rhythm. Rolling suitcases hummed across the polished floor, the smell of fresh coffee drifted from kiosks, and the loudspeaker announced boarding groups in a practiced monotone. For most travelers, it was an ordinary Monday. For Jonathan King, it was supposed to be a straightforward trip to New York, just another flight in a calendar already packed with investor meetings and boardroom negotiations. Jonathan, 46 years old, dressed in a navy blazer and dark jeans, carried himself with the calm assurance of a man who had built his life from nothing. His shoes were polished, but not flashy. A leather backpack rested on his shoulder. There was no entourage, no assistants trailing behind, only him, quietly moving toward gate C-17, ticket in hand. He placed his phone in his pocket, glancing briefly at the time. 2 hours until his meeting at the firm's New York office. Plenty of time, he thought. As CEO of King Global Systems, one of the fastest-growing data security firms in the country, Jonathan had negotiated contracts worth billions. He had testified before Congress. He had stood in rooms with presidents and prime ministers. Yet here, walking to a gate like any other passenger, he looked almost ordinary. That was how he preferred it. When he reached the first-class lane, a young gate agent with blonde hair pulled tightly into a bun stepped forward. Her name tag read Amber Collins. She scanned his ticket once, then frowned. "Sir," she said, tilting her head with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes, "this line is for first-class boarding only." Jonathan's brow furrowed, but his voice remained calm. "Yes, that's what I booked. Here's my pass." Amber looked again, pressing her lips together. "I'm afraid this doesn't look right. First-class tickets don't usually look like this." "Where did you purchase it?" Jonathan exhaled slowly, already sensing the undertone. "Directly through the airline's app. Same as always." She tapped on her keyboard, feigning confusion. Behind her, the supervisor, Brian Foster, a tall man in a gray suit jacket, walked over. Amber leaned close and whispered something. Brian nodded and stepped forward. "Sir," Brian said firmly, folding his arms, "we're going to need you to step aside. This ticket seems irregular." Jonathan handed over his ID without hesitation. "You can check. It's valid." Brian barely glanced at the ID before shaking his head. "We've seen people try to sneak into first class before. I don't want to cause a scene, so please wait over there until we sort this out." The words "sneak into first class" hung in the air like smoke. A couple of passengers in line shifted uncomfortably, A man in a business suit raised his phone, pretending to check messages but subtly recording. Jonathan noticed, but said nothing. Inside, a storm pressed against his ribs. He had lived this moment in different forms all his life: classrooms where teachers assumed he cheated on exams, meetings where colleagues thought he was the assistant instead of the leader, restaurants where waiters ignored his table, and now, again, at the airport gate. But Jonathan's face remained composed, his voice low. I'm telling you, this ticket is correct. My seat is 2A. Amber crossed her arms. That's the front row of first class. Those seats are reserved for our premium flyers. Not she cut herself off, but the implication lingered. Jonathan met her gaze, his expression steady. Not what she looked away. Muttering, not usually assigned to. Passengers like you. The supervisor shifted uncomfortably, but didn't correct her. Instead, he gestured toward the seating area. Sir, if you don't comply, I'll have to call security. For a moment, the terminal noise seemed to fade. Jonathan could hear his own breath, controlled and deliberate. His mother's voice from decades ago rose in memory. When they tell you that you don't belong, stand taller, belong louder. He glanced at the growing line of passengers, at their hesitant stares. Some looked sympathetic, others indifferent. None stepped forward. Jonathan inhaled deeply, then slid his phone from his pocket. He dialed a number and spoke quietly, so only Amber and Brian could hear. This is Jonathan King. Initiate Falcon Protocol. There was a pause on the line. Then a woman's steady voice answered, Understood. Falcon Protocol in motion. Jonathan ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and looked directly at Brian. His calm tone carried weight. I suggest you finish checking your system. You'll find the ticket is valid, very valid. Brian frowned, unsettled by the certainty in Jonathan's voice. He turned back to the computer, typing furiously. Amber glanced nervously between the screen and Jonathan, as if realizing, too late, that this man wasn't who she thought. Around them, the boarding announcement echoed. Now boarding Group 1, first-class passengers. Jonathan remained where he stood, upright, composed, waiting. For the first time, it was Amber and Brian who looked uncertain, their authority cracking under the weight of his quiet strength. And though the crowd didn't yet know it, though Amber and Brian certainly didn't, the call Jonathan had just made would unravel far more than a board in denial. It would shake the entire foundation of Aurelius Airlines. Jonathan didn't move from the spot where Amber and Brian had told him to stand aside. His tall frame seemed rooted to the floor, steady as a tree in the middle of a storm. Around him, the terminal swelled with noise, the rustle of bags, the impatient sighs of passengers waiting to board, the faint cry of a baby in a stroller. But inside Jonathan's chest, there was only silence. He had made the call. Falcon Protocol was in motion, but that didn't erase the sting of humiliation burning in the back of his throat. He shifted slightly, adjusting the strap of his backpack. In that small, ordinary gesture, memories came unbidden. A classroom in Cleveland. Age 12. A teacher had handed back math tests. Shaking her head. Jonathan, I think you copied. No way you solved these on your own. The room had gone silent. Every eye on him. He had protested, quietly, but the disbelief in her voice cut deeper than any punishment. A meeting room in San Francisco. Age 30. He had walked in wearing a tailored suit, ready to present to venture capitalists. One of them, gray-haired and casual, had handed him his empty coffee cup without looking up, murmuring, "Can you get me a refill before the meeting starts?" When Jonathan had replied, "I'm the founder," the man had chuckled, embarrassed but not apologetic. And now, at 46, at the peak of his career, it was still happening. Doubted, dismissed, stopped at the gate. His jaw tightened. Rage wanted to claw its way out, to shout, to demand why dignity must always be proven and never presumed. But rage was a luxury he could not afford. Not here, not now. Instead, Jonathan drew a slow breath. He repeated the mantra his adoptive mother, Lorraine, had given him long ago. Strength isn't loud, it's steady. He pulled his phone back out and glanced at the screen. A text notification blinked from Danielle Moore, his chief of staff. Falcon protocol confirmed. Team mobilized. Do you want escalation level 1? Jonathan typed back one word, proceed. He slipped the phone into his pocket again. His hands were steady, though his chest still ached with the weight of memory. Brian returned from the counter, expression stiff. "Sir, I'm still not seeing this ticket in the system. I'll have to call security." Jonathan's eyes locked on his, unwavering. "Do what you think you need to do." Brian opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Something in Jonathan's calmness unnerved him. Amber shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the passengers who were clearly listening now. A couple of them whispered to each other, one woman shaking her head. Jonathan turned slightly, scanning the faces. He wondered, not for the first time, why silence was the default reaction of bystanders. How many times in history had injustice survived because witnesses chose comfort over courage? His gaze fell on a young woman seated near the window. She wore glasses, a denim jacket, a book on her lap. She looked away quickly when their eyes met, but he had noticed the phone in her hand pointed discreetly toward the gate. Recording. Good, he thought. Evidence mattered. It always did. The announcement echoed again. Borden Group 1. Amber called the names of other first-class passengers, smiling brightly as she scanned their tickets. A man in a tailored suit brushed past Jonathan, not meeting his eyes, and walked down the jet bridge without incident. Jonathan stood still, every second stretching longer. His mind drifted back to a conversation from years ago, sitting with his mentor, Judge Anthony Myers. The older man had told him, "Power is not about shouting the loudest in the room. Power is knowing when to hold your tongue and when to open the floodgates. Sometimes, Jonathan, you hold back until the right moment. Then you let the tide sweep them away." Was this that moment, or was he still waiting? His phone buzzed again. Another message from Danielle. First layer findings maintenance cover-ups confirmed. HR discrimination cases suppressed. Media contacts on standby. Do you want press involved yet? Jonathan's thumb hovered over the keyboard. He closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. It wasn't about revenge. If it became about his ego, he would lose sight of the larger battle. He typed back, "Not yet. Keep digging." When he opened his eyes, Amber was watching him nervously. Brian had stepped aside, muttering into his walkie-talkie. Jonathan could hear fragments. Passenger refusing. Security requested. The storm inside him surged again, demanding release. He imagined himself raising his voice, demanding justice on the spot, shaming them publicly. But then he imagined what that video would look like online, a black man yelling at staff, surrounded by security. The world would see aggression, not dignity. No, he would not give them that satisfaction. Instead, he adjusted his blazer and leaned slightly against the metal railing, exuding patience that cost him more than anyone could guess. He thought of his employees back at King Global Systems, thousands of them, many from backgrounds like his, who looked to him as proof that resilience could conquer the barriers they faced. If he faltered now, what would that signal minutes past? Passengers boarded, the line thinned, Jonathan remained, waiting. Finally, Brian returned, 2 security officers behind him. "Sir, you need to leave the gate area until this is resolved." Jonathan straightened. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "This ticket is valid. I am not leaving." One of the officers, a younger man with tired eyes, glanced at Jonathan's boarding pass, his brow furrowed. "This looks fine to me," he murmured. Brian shot him a sharp look. "Check the system again." The officer hesitated, then handed the pass back to Jonathan. "Why don't we step aside and sort this quietly?" Jonathan took the pass, meeting the man's gaze. Quietly is how they bury the truth. The words weren't shouted. They were spoken with such calm certainty that even Amber's face flushed. A couple of passengers nearby looked up, startled, as though they'd heard something important, something worth remembering. Jonathan knew then that whatever happened next, the tide was already turning. The humiliation he endured at that gate was no longer just his. It was being witnessed, recorded, absorbed into the larger story waiting to unfold. And somewhere across the city, Danielle and the Falcon Protocol team were pulling threads that, once unraveled, would bring the whole fabric of Aurelius Airlines to light. Jonathan remained still, but inside, the storm had quieted. He had made his choice. He would not explode. He would not retreat. He would wait, with the patience of a man who knew the ground beneath his feet was already shifting. Because sometimes power was not in the roar. Sometimes it was in the silence before the flood, across the city, in a glass-walled office lit by glowing computer screens. Danielle Moore leaned over a desk stacked with files. She had been with Jonathan King for nearly a decade, through mergers, crises, and triumphs. When his quiet voice had said, "Initiate Falcon Protocol," she had known exactly what to do. "All right, team," she said firmly. "You know the drill. Split into tracks. Legal, data, media. We're on the clock." 3 analysts bent over their laptops, fingers flying, charts, spreadsheets, and hidden contracts flickered across the screens. Falcon Protocol wasn't a single action. It was an arsenal. Every partnership, every investment Jonathan had in Aurelius Airlines, every clause they had ignored, every complaint buried, it was all fair game now. Carlos Mendez, the veteran mechanic, appeared on the video call. His face was worn, his hands scarred by decades of work in airplane hangars. "I shouldn't even be talking to you," he muttered, looking over his shoulder, "but I've had enough. They've been cutting corners for years. Safety checks skipped, reports forged, engines signed off without inspection. I filed reports, but they disappeared." Danielle's tone softened. "Carlos, this isn't just about you. People's lives are at stake. We need you to be brave." Carlos exhaled shakily. "Then let's do it. I've got copies, dates, signatures, everything." One of the analysts, Mariah, typed rapidly, pulling up the airline's maintenance log. "He's right. Look at this. They filed the same inspection report 3 times. Copy-paste? That's impossible unless they falsified it." Danielle's jaw tightened. Keep digging. Cross-check with FAA filings. Get me anomalies. Meanwhile, another call came through Olivia Grant, a flight attendant still in uniform, her hair pulled back in a bun after a red-eye shift. "I saw the video," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "They stopped him at the gate. I wasn't surprised. I've watched it happen to other passengers, always the same pattern, always the same excuses." Danielle leaned closer to the screen. "Document everything. Olivia, incidents, names, dates. This is bigger than one denial." Olivia nodded. "I already started. I kept a journal. They laughed at me when I filed complaints, but I kept the copies. I'll send them now. At the same time, on social media." Rebecca Hall uploaded her 30-second clip. The caption read, "This man showed his first-class ticket. They told him to step aside anyway. Why within minutes?" It spread. Comments exploded. Classic profiling. "I've been through this." Boarding while black. Jonathan's phone buzzed with the notifications piling up, though he didn't check them yet. He stood calmly at the gate, still under watchful eyes, while the machine he had quietly built, this hidden network of truth-seekers, roared to life. Danielle's phone lit again. The caller ID read Samuel Wright, a retired pilot, 62, who had flown for Aurelius for 30 years. He spoke with a tired honesty. "I don't know how long I can carry this on my conscience. The executives, they forced us to log flights as safe even when we knew the planes weren't ready. And when I raised my voice, they pushed me out. They called it early retirement." "Samuel," Danielle asked, "are you willing to go on record?" There was a long silence. Then his voice, steady. "Yes. For him. Yes. For Jonathan. He doesn't deserve this. None of us do." Danielle wrote furiously in her notebook, her heart pounding. The puzzle was forming. Each voice, Carlos, Olivia, Samuel, was a piece of a much larger picture. Aurelius Airlines wasn't just guilty of humiliating a man at the gate. They were guilty of building their empire on lies, bias, and dangerous shortcuts. In the control room of this operation, screens flashed red as Mariah shouted, "Look at this. Settlement documents, millions paid to silence discrimination lawsuits. They claimed confidentiality, swept it all away." Danielle nodded grimly. "Save everything, encrypt and duplicate. If they try to shut us down, this goes public." She dialed Jonathan, speaking quickly when he answered. "We've got the first wave, maintenance fraud, buried HR complaints, former employees ready to testify. The picture is clear." Jonathan's voice was low, calm as ever. "Not yet. Let them keep underestimating me. The higher they think they stand, the harder they'll fall." Back at the gate, the tension thickened. Amber avoided his gaze now, her earlier confidence drained. Brian kept pacing, walkie-talkie in hand, waiting for instructions that never came. Passengers whispered, stealing glances at Jonathan as if sensing they were witnessing the beginning of something larger. Rebecca's video had already reached local reporters. One journalist tweeted developing story at O'Hare Black CEO denied boarding first class despite valid ticket. Video attached. Within an hour, news anchors were replaying the clip, commentators asking why a man with proof in his hand was still told he didn't belong. Danielle updated the team. "It's spreading. Fast. Media is circling. Crowley will try to spin this." She was right. Across town, in a sleek corner office, Martin Crowley, CEO of Aurelius Airlines, leaned back in his leather chair. His assistant showed him the viral clip. Crowley scoffed. "This is nothing. One employee overstepped. We'll issue a statement, blame it on a misunderstanding, and it'll blow over." But even as he said it, his phone buzzed with frantic texts from board members, stock price alerts, investor concerns. The ground was shifting beneath his feet, though he didn't yet realize how quickly it would collapse. Danielle closed her laptop and looked around at her team. "We're not just fighting for Jonathan. We're fighting for every person who's been told they don't belong. Let's make sure the world sees the truth." And at gate C-17, Jonathan King remained still, his eyes steady, his presence quiet but unshakable. The seeds had been planted. Exposure was coming. And the storm gathering behind Falcon Protocol would soon break open, flooding every hidden corner of Aurelius Airlines with light. The gate area at O'Hare had grown crowded. More passengers trickled in for the delayed flight, dragging rolling suitcases and sipping coffee from paper cups. Yet, instead of the usual murmur of travel chatter, there was a tense, watchful silence. People knew something unusual was happening. A man with a valid first-class ticket had been told to step aside, and the longer it went on, the harder it became to look away. Jonathan King remained calm, his hands folded neatly over the boarding pass he'd shown a dozen times already. He wasn't pacing, nor raising his voice. His stillness carried weight, like a stone in a rushing stream. Amber Collins avoided eye contact, staring down at her terminal, tapping keys that led nowhere. Brian Foster stood stiff, radio pressed to his side, his eyes darting at the crowd as if he feared they would turn on him. Passengers exchanged glances. Some lifted their phones to record. Others pretended not to notice, fiddling with earbuds or magazines, their discomfort hanging in the air. The silence was not indifference. It was fear. Fear of speaking up, of drawing attention, of being the one who broke the dam. Jonathan caught the gaze of a young man in a blue hoodie, maybe early 20s, standing near the boarding line. Their eyes met for a second. The young man shifted his weight, raised his phone, then slowly lowered it again. Jonathan did not blame him. He understood the hesitation. Bystanders often carried their own scars. Their own memories of moments when speaking out had cost them something. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his voice low but clear, addressing no one and everyone at once. "Silence," he said, "can feel safer, but silence has never protected anyone in the long run." A murmur ran through the waiting area. A woman with silver hair clutched her handbag tighter, her lips pressed thin. She wanted to say something. Her posture betrayed it, but she remained seated, her silence as loud as any shout. In a corner, a boy around 12 tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Why won't they let him on?" he whispered. The mother shushed him quickly, eyes darting around, as though the question itself was dangerous. Jonathan's chest tightened. Children always saw the truth first. Brian broke the tension, his voice sharp. "Sir, you need to wait until further notice." His tone carried the brittle edge of someone who felt his authority slipping. Jonathan met his gaze evenly. "Further notice for what? Mr. Foster, you've scanned my ticket. You know it's valid. The only thing unclear here is why I'm the only one told to step aside." The words echoed, heavy and undeniable. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A man in a business suit closed his laptop halfway, listening more intently now. Rebecca Hall, the teacher who had posted the video, kept her phone steady, recording, but the silence remained. No one moved to intervene. No one raised their voice in solidarity, and Jonathan, patient though he was, felt the weight of that silence pressing down harder than Brian's authority or Amber's cold deflections. Inside, a quiet storm brewed. He thought of his father, a man who had once been denied service at a diner in Mississippi decades ago. His father had come home that night with hurt in his eyes, but steel in his voice one day. "Son, the world will test you, and you'll have to decide if you'll stand silent or make them see." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He knew this was that day. Behind the counter, Amber tried again. "Mr. Foster, maybe we should just let him board. It's not worth Brian cut her off. No, we follow procedure until I get clearance. He doesn't board. Clearance." The word sounded absurd. Clearance for a paid, confirmed seat. Clearance for dignity. Jonathan rose slowly from his chair, not in anger, but in deliberate presence. The act itself, standing, pulled every gaze in the gate toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but carrying across the room. "You don't know me, and you don't owe me anything. But you do know what you've seen. I bought a ticket, I followed the rules, and still, I'm told to wait." A few heads nodded faintly, others avoided looking at him. "I don't ask you to fight for me," he continued. "I ask you to remember this moment. Ask yourself what it means when a man is told he doesn't belong, even when the paper in his hand says otherwise." The silence wavered. The boy in the corner whispered again to his mother. This time, she didn't shush him. She pulled him closer. Her eyes locked on Jonathan. Brian stepped forward, flustered. "That's enough, sir. Sit down." Jonathan did not sit. Instead, he turned slightly, his gaze sweeping over the passengers. His calm presence unsettled Brian more than shouting ever could. At that exact moment, Danielle Moore's message pinged on Jonathan's phone. He glanced at it briefly. It read, "Falcon is airborne. Evidence secured. Hold steady." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The game was larger now than this gate, but the lesson unfolding here, this theater of silence and complicity, was one the world needed to see. Rebecca's video streamed live now, thousands watching. The comments ticked upward in real time. Why is no one saying anything? Look at that crowd silent. This is America, 2025, and still. Jonathan inhaled deeply, then sat again, reclaiming his seat not by permission but by choice. The crowd remained hushed. The silence of bystanders stretched on, heavy and damning. Yet, in that silence, Jonathan sensed something else, a shift. The unease was no longer only his burden. The people around him now carried it too, and unease, once planted, had a way of growing. The silence of bystanders was powerful, but so was the discomfort it left behind, and Jonathan knew that discomfort was the first crack in the wall. Jonathan King sat with his boarding pass resting on his knee, the weight of silence pressing in from every corner of Gate C-17. He knew the moment had arrived. Danielle's message was still burning in his pocket. "Falcon is airborne. Evidence secured. Hold steady." His father's words echoed in memory. "One day the world will test you, and you'll have to decide if you'll stand silent or make them see." He reached calmly into his jacket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered for a moment over the contact list, and then he pressed. The ring lasted only a second before the line clicked open. "Leah," Jonathan said softly. On the other end, Leah Thompson, head of global security for King Enterprises, responded with the same calm efficiency that had steadied him through crises before. "I've been waiting for your call, sir." Her voice, steady but urgent, carried through the line. "We've confirmed maintenance fraud, HR cover-ups, settlement payouts. The system is rotten from the ground up. Do you want me to proceed?" Jonathan's eyes swept across the gate area, Amber fidgeting at the terminal. Brian, stiff as a soldier trying to hold his authority. Rebecca, streaming with her phone. The passengers, frozen in their own conflict. He felt the weight of the moment, but also its clarity. "Yes," Jonathan replied. His voice was quiet, but it carried the force of a verdict. "Initiate full lock." Leah didn't hesitate. "Understood. Protocol Raven is live." Within minutes, the gears of a much larger machine began to turn. At Aurelius Airlines headquarters, alerts pinged across screens. Internal servers went dark. Executives found themselves locked out of their own email. On trading floors, automated sell orders triggered as rumors spread that a scandal was about to erupt. Investors' phones buzzed, text chains lit up. What's happening with Aurelius? Why are systems offline? Back at O'Hare, Brian's radio crackled. A frantic voice from operations. "We've just lost our scheduling system. Flights are grounded. Nobody can access dispatch." "What the hell is going on?" Brian frowned, tapping the radio. "Say again," the voice repeated, sharper this time. "We're locked out. We can't move planes. Nothing's working. It's like someone pulled the plug." Amber looked up from her screen, her voice trembling. "Mr. Foster, our terminal just froze." Passengers stirred uneasily. A few checked flight apps on their phones, frowning at sudden delays spreading like wildfire across the board. Jonathan remained seated, his phone still in hand. Calm, unhurried. His presence was no longer passive. It was charged, magnetic. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was orchestrating. Leah came back on the line. "News outlets are calling. We'll let the story break naturally. The evidence package is queued for release if they deny. FAA has already been tipped off. And Jonathan, the video of you at the gate. It's everywhere. Millions of views in the last 30 minutes. Jonathan exhaled slowly, then let them see. Across the concourse, a news alert buzzed on phones. Breaking black CEO denied boarding first class at O'Hare. Airline systems in crisis. Rebecca glanced at her screen, her eyes widening. She turned her camera back toward Jonathan, whispering into the live stream, "He's not just a passenger. He's someone bigger. Something's happening here." Amber, shaken, leaned toward Brian. "This is spiraling. We should stop. Just let him board." Brian's face flushed red. "We don't cave. We wait for orders." But even as he said it, his radio hissed again. "Urgent orders." "There are no orders. Everything's down. The whole network is frozen." Jonathan rose once more, his voice steady. "This is bigger than you know. Mr. Foster, your systems are shutting down because the truth cannot be hidden anymore. This isn't about me boarding a flight. It's about accountability." A ripple went through the passengers. Phones buzzed, eyes widened. The silence of bystanders shifted into whispers, then murmurs. They weren't only watching anymore, they were realizing they were part of a story unfolding in real time. On the other end of the call, Leah updated him again. "Sir, the CEO's office is scrambling. Crowley is trying to hold a press briefing, but his mic went dead mid-sentence. The footage of Carlos, Olivia, and Samuel is ready to release if they deny. Should I hit send? Jonathan paused, his mind weighing justice and timing. He thought of the child at the gate asking his mother why. He thought of the thousands of employees inside Aurelius, honest workers ground down by a corrupt culture, and he thought of every silent bystander waiting for someone to take the first step. Yes, he said quietly, send it. And with that, the digital floodgates opened. Files, testimony, videos, all of it began appearing across social platforms, major news outlets, and regulatory inboxes. The curtain had been torn down. Within half an hour, Aurelius Airlines was in free fall. Flights grounded nationwide, stock tumbling, reporters crowding outside their headquarters, passengers across airports chanting the same hashtag that had exploded online, non-boarding while black. At gate C-17, the boy tugged his mother's sleeve again. "Mom," he whispered. He stopped the planes. The mother, tears in her eyes, squeezed her son's hand. "No," she said softly. "He started something bigger." Jonathan lowered the phone, sliding it back into his pocket. Around him, the silence was gone. In its place was a rising hum of awareness, of people realizing they had just witnessed history bend, even if only slightly, toward justice. He looked at Amber, who could barely meet his gaze, and at Brian, whose authority had evaporated in the storm. And he thought again of his father's words. The world had tested him, and he had answered. The phone call had been simple, but its echoes were about to shake an empire. In downtown Chicago, the headquarters of Aurelius Airlines buzzed with chaos. Screens flickered, phones rang unanswered, and executives sprinted through hallways that only hours earlier had carried the calm hum of routine. The building's steel and glass facade now seemed like a fragile shell, rattled by the storm of truth tearing it apart from within. Martin Crowley stormed into the operations center, his tie loose, his face flushed with anger. "Get me answers," he barked. "Why are flights grounded? Why are servers down? Somebody fix this before the board calls for my head." A junior IT officer, pale and sweating, stammered, "Sir, it's not a glitch. It's a lockout. Whoever triggered it knew our systems better than we do. They've frozen us from the inside." Crowley slammed his fist against the table. "Impossible. No one outside has that kind of access." But even as he spoke, a large screen on the wall refreshed, and damning headlines rolled across it. Whistleblowers expose Aurelius Airlines, safety cover-ups, FAA launches emergency inquiry, racial profile and allegations, go viral. Crowley's mouth went dry. "How much did they get?" he demanded. "All of it," the IT officer whispered. "Maintenance fraud, HR settlements, internal memos. They're everywhere now. CNN, The Times, even local stations. The files are verified." Crowley swore under his breath. "Get legal, draft a statement. We'll deny, blame rogue employees, contain the fire." But the fire had already jumped the line. On Wall Street, Aurelius stock plummeted, wiping out billions in market value. Institutional investors dumped shares. Travel blogs warned passengers not to book with Aurelius, citing unprecedented uncertainty. Rival airlines quietly celebrated, preparing to scoop up stranded travelers. Inside the boardroom, directors convened an emergency session. One slammed his briefcase onto the table. "Martin, you told us we had nothing to worry about. You swore the complaints were isolated. Now we're staring at lawsuits federal probes, and a PR disaster. You've destroyed shareholder trust." Crowley's voice cracked with desperation. "It's under control." "No, it isn't," another director snapped. "Half the fleet is grounded. Regulators are circling, and your face is on every news channel as the man who let it happen." Crowley's phone vibrated violently. It was the governor's office, then the Secretary of Transportation. He ignored both calls. He knew what they wanted: accountability, something he was no longer capable of giving. Meanwhile, at gate C-17, Jonathan King sat with quiet composure, watching the collapse ripple outward like shockwaves from a single stone dropped into a still pond. Passengers refreshed their phones, their screens filling with breaking news about the very airline they were supposed to fly. Gasps and whispers spread like wildfire. Amber Collins looked pale, her hands trembling as she whispered to a colleague. He knew. He knew this was coming. Brian Foster's authority dissolved before everyone's eyes. He barked orders into his dead radio, sweat beading on his forehead. No one listened. His commands evaporated in the thick air of a collective realization. Jonathan's phone buzzed again. Danielle's voice came through the line, steady but charged with urgency. "It's working. Crowley's finished. The board is fracturing. Regulators are demanding immediate hearings. Sir, they're going down faster than we expected." Jonathan's eyes narrowed, though his tone stayed calm. "Let it unfold. Don't force the collapse, let them reveal themselves. This isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation." On the news, images flashed of Carlos Mendez holding up falsified maintenance logs, his voice raw but resolute as he spoke of engines signed off without checks. Olivia Grant described passengers humiliated for their race or accent. Samuel Wright, silver-haired and steady, looked straight into the camera as he said, "I couldn't carry the lies anymore. Too many people silenced. It ends now." America watched, stunned. Social media swelled with outrage. Hashtags trended worldwide. Borden while black. Grounded truth. Aurelius collapse. Millions of people shared their own travel stories. Humiliations at gates. Dismissals by staff. Silent complicity of bystanders. A movement spread in real time. At headquarters, Crowley tried to rally his executive team. "We can outlast this. The news cycle will move on. It always does." But his general counsel shook her head. "Not this time. The documents are too detailed. The testimony's too credible. And Jonathan King, he's the one pulling the strings. Do you understand what that means? He's not just a passenger. He's the man holding a controlling stake in our future." Crowley froze. The room seemed to tilt around him. "King." "Yes," she said flatly. "The same Jonathan King whose firm invested in our last capital raise. He's not only exposing us, he owns enough shares to influence whether Aurelius survives at all." The realization gutted Crowley. All his bluster, all his certainty that this was a storm to be waited out, crumbled in an instant. Jonathan wasn't just a victim. He was an executioner with the law, the market, and the truth on his side. Back at O'Hare, the boy in the corner tugged his mother's sleeve again. "Mom, is he the reason our flight's not going?" The mother smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "No, sweetheart. He's the reason things might finally change." Jonathan watched as passengers began to shift from silent discomfort to active voices. A man in a suit murmured, "This is history in the making." A college student whispered to her friend, "I can't believe I stayed quiet. Never again." Rebecca Hall, still live streaming, said softly to her audience, What you're seeing isn't just about one flight, it's about years of silence finally breaking. The airport loudspeakers chimed, a sterile announcement cutting through the charged atmosphere. Attention all passengers. Aurelius Airlines regrets to inform you that, due to unforeseen technical difficulties, all flights are temporarily suspended. Please remain in your current location until further notice. The gate area erupted. Passengers groaned, shouted, demanded answers. But, amid the chaos, Jonathan remained still, the calm at the center of the storm. He knew this collapse wasn't chaos. It was cleansing. Danielle called again. "Sir, the board is preparing to remove Crowley. They're desperate for stability, and regulators are demanding to know if you'll testify. What do you want me to tell them?" Jonathan looked around him, the confused passengers, the trembling staff, the cameras recording every second. Then he spoke with quiet conviction. "Tell them the same thing I'll tell the world. This isn't about destroying Aurelius. It's about remaking it. If they want survival, they'll rebuild with dignity at the core. Otherwise, let it fall." At that moment, Martin Crowley's career ended, and Jonathan King's vision for justice began to rise from the rubble. The morning sun crept through the windows of O'Hare, casting pale gold on the weary passengers still clustered at gate C-17. The air buzzed with restless energy, anger over delays, confusion about announcements, curiosity about the man whose calm had outlasted authority. But, while travelers grumbled into their phones, elsewhere in the country, a new chorus of voices began to rise. Danielle Moore sat at her command desk, surrounded by glowing screens. Each square on the wall displayed a different live feed whistleblowers, journalists, regulators, public hearings hastily convened. She had spent years cultivating trust with insiders, people who had been silenced, threatened, or dismissed. Now they stepped into the light. The first broadcast came from Carlos Mendez. The camera caught him in a dim kitchen, sleeves rolled up, grease still under his fingernails. His voice was gravelly, but his words carried fire. "For 20 years I signed my name to inspection logs. I did it honestly, but then they told me to look the other way. Engines uninspected, repairs left undone. I refused. They buried my reports. I couldn't carry that weight anymore. So here's the truth." He held up a stack of forged documents, shaking them at the lens. "Every signature they forced, every life they endangered, it's all here." The clip spread instantly. Aviation forums exploded. Pilots, mechanics, passengers alike demanded answers. Next came Olivia Grant. She appeared in full uniform, standing outside a terminal, eyes fierce though her voice quavered. "I've watched black families turned away from boarding. I've seen Latino passengers pulled aside for random checks that weren't random at all. I filed reports, and they vanished. I spoke up, and I was told to stay in my lane. Today, I'm done staying silent. This isn't just about a CEO denied boarding. It's about every traveler told they don't belong." Her testimony struck a nerve. Hashtags multiplied. Travelers flooded social media with their own experiences. A mother who was forced to recheck her stroller 3 times while others walked through. The veteran humiliated at a gate for not looking like first-class material. Then Samuel Wright stepped forward. The retired pilot, hair silver, shoulders still squared from years in the cockpit, spoke at a press podium outside his modest suburban home. "I loved flying. I gave 30 years to that airline. But when I raised concerns about unsafe practices, they ended my career. I stayed quiet too long, but when I saw Jonathan King treated like a trespasser at his own gate, I knew silence wasn't an option anymore. My conscience demanded I speak. He tapped the folder on the podium. These are records from my flights. Times I was ordered to log all clear when systems weren't tested. I won't carry that lie into retirement. The crowd of reporters roared with questions. His words aired live. And within minutes, the FAA issued a statement. An emergency investigation into Aurelius Airlines has been launched in light of new evidence from former employees. At O'Hare, phones chimed with alerts. Passengers read headlines aloud, their frustration turning to fascination. Listen to this. One man said, a mechanic, a flight attendant, and a pilot all confirming corruption. This is real. Amber Collins sank into her chair at the counter, whispering, "It's over. Everything we thought we were protecting, it's over." Brian Foster paced, his jaw clenched, but even he could feel the authority draining from him like sand slipping through fingers. Rebecca Hall kept filming, her audience swelling by the tens of thousands. "You're watching history," she told her viewers. "The truth is breaking open from every side. This isn't a glitch or a delay. This is the sound of a system collapsing." In New York, cable networks aired a split-screen Carlos holding his forged documents, Olivia speaking of discrimination, Samuel demanding accountability, and Jonathan still seated at gate C-17 serene amid the storm. The juxtaposition was striking. One man's composure had opened the floodgates for many voices. Danielle coordinated tirelessly, lining up more insiders, a former HR clerk ready to testify about shredded complaint files, a finance officer prepared to reveal hidden payouts, even a junior IT worker who confessed to being ordered to delete incriminating emails. Her team clipped, verified, and released each testimony strategically. One voice at a time, she told her analysts, "Let the world feel the weight of every story. Don't drown them in noise. Make each truth ring out." And it worked. Ratings soared on every network covering the scandal. Public opinion shifted rapidly. Aurelius wasn't facing a minor PR incident. It was facing a cultural reckoning. Meanwhile, Martin Crowley clutched the edge of a mahogany table at headquarters. The board sat across from him, grim and cold. "They're coming one after another." A director growled, "Your lies have given them courage." Crowley tried to deflect. "These are disgruntled employees, bitter retirees. They're exaggerating." But another director shoved a tablet across the table. "Exaggerating. Look at this. Documents signed in your name. Settlement agreements you authorized. We can't defend this anymore." "Martin." The general counsel cleared her throat. "The SEC has already issued inquiries. The FAA is escalating to emergency hearings. If we don't act, the company won't survive." Crowley's voice rose in desperation. "You can't cut me out. I built this airline." The chairman's gaze was ice. "No, you built a house of cards, and Jonathan King just blew it down." Back at O'Hare, Jonathan's phone buzzed with a final update from Danielle. "The whistleblowers are everywhere. The public's with us. Regulators are circling. Crowley's finished." Jonathan leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. A quiet satisfaction rose within him, not vengeance, but vindication. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't thrown a punch. He had simply held his ground, and in doing so, he had made space for others to stand up too. The boy in the corner clutched his mother's hand. "Mom, why are all those people talking now?" His mother smiled softly. because sometimes it takes just one person to remind everyone else they're not alone. And, across America, the silence that had protected corruption and discrimination for years was shattering, one whistleblower at a time. By late afternoon, the story had leapt from the airport to every television set and smartphone in America. News anchors repeated the footage on an endless loop, Jonathan King sitting silently with his boarding pass. Amber Collins flustered at the terminal, Brian Foster barking into a useless radio, and Rebecca Hall's live stream feeding millions of curious eyes, overlaid with the testimony of Carlos, Olivia, and Samuel. It was more than a scandal, it was a reckoning. At O'Hare, the gate filled with restless travelers, some angry about delays, others glued to their phones. Screens above the boarding area displayed rolling news alerts. FAA launches emergency hearings into Aurelius Airlines. Whistleblowers accuse Airline of systemic bias and safety negligence. CEO Martin Crowley faces ouster. Jonathan remained seated, calm as ever, his presence drawing curious stares. People whispered, pointing. They recognized him now, not just as the man stopped at the gate, but as the figure anchoring a nationwide storm. Rebecca kept her camera trained, narrating softly. We are witnessing accountability unfold in real time. This isn't about one man denied boarding. It's about years of silence cracking open. Her live stream numbers climbed, comments flooding in from viewers who shared their own stories of being profiled or dismissed. The public pressure boiled over into the streets. In Chicago, a group of college students marched with hastily drawn signs, "Dignity is not optional and grounded for justice." In Atlanta, travelers stranded by grounded flights chanted the viral hashtag in unison, "You're boarding," while Black. In Los Angeles, a civil rights coalition held a press conference, demanding congressional hearings into discrimination in the airline industry. Cable news invited experts to weigh in. A former transportation secretary declared, "This is more than a corporate scandal. This is a test of whether dignity can be enforced as a standard, not a suggestion." A cultural commentator added, "The power of this moment lies in how ordinary people see themselves in it." Jonathan King is not just a CEO, he is every passenger who has ever been told they don't belong. At Aurelius headquarters, Crowley tried desperately to spin the narrative. Cameras caught him leaving the building, flanked by aides, refusing to answer shouted questions. His silence became another symbol of guilt. Inside the boardroom, directors argued heatedly. Public confidence is gone. One said, shareholders are calling nonstop. Regulators are demanding sworn testimony. If we don't remove him now, we won't have a company left to defend. Another director, voice clipped with urgency, added, and King owns the largest independent stake. He's positioned to dictate terms whether we like it or not. Crowley has become a liability. Crowley slammed his hand on the table. You can't let him take this company. He's weaponizing optics, playing victim while he orchestrates our destruction. The chairman's voice cut through the noise. No, Martin. He's holding up a mirror, and the reflection is killing us. Across the country, politicians seized the moment, senators tweeted statements of outrage, mayors called for hearings. The president himself, speaking at an unrelated event, was asked about the scandal. His answer was careful but pointed. Every American deserves dignity when they travel. If an airline fails to provide that, it is not merely a business issue. It is a civil rights issue. That clip aired on primetime news, sending shockwaves through Aurelius investors. If the White House was weighing in, Survival would require drastic change. At gate C-17, Jonathan's phone vibrated. Danielle's voice carried a mixture of triumph and caution. "It's happening faster than expected. Public pressure is overwhelming them. They'll try to offer concessions, apologies, maybe resignations, but the board wants to know your position. Do you want to push for collapse or negotiate reform?" Jonathan's gaze drifted across the gate to the boy clutching his mother's hand, to Amber shrinking behind her counter, to Rebecca still filming with fierce determination. He thought of the mechanic risking his pension, the flight attendant risking her job, the retired pilot risking his peace. This was bigger than him. It was about all of them. He answered slowly, every word deliberate. "We don't settle for scraps. If Aurelius survives, it must be rebuilt, not patched. Rebuilt with accountability at its core. Otherwise, it falls." Danielle exhaled. "Then that's the message I'll deliver." Meanwhile, social media erupted with acts of solidarity. Passengers at airports nationwide refused to board Aurelius flights, staging sit-ins. Influencers and celebrities posted the viral clip with captions like, "I've been there too," and "Justice at 30,000 feet." Donations poured into legal defense funds for whistleblowers. The story had become more than news. It was a movement. Rebecca's live stream captured the transformation in real time. "Look at these people," she said softly, turning her camera on the waiting area. "They came here to fly. Now, they're part of something they didn't expect, a moment of reckoning that belongs to all of us." Amber finally broke her silence. Her voice cracked as she approached Jonathan. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have followed orders without question. I saw what was happening, and I froze." Jonathan regarded her with steady eyes. "You're not the first to stay silent. What matters is what you do next." Her shoulders trembled. "Then I'll speak. I'll tell the truth about the pressure we're under, about the culture that trained us to treat some passengers differently. I don't care if it costs me my job." Jonathan gave a small nod. "That's how change begins." Passengers nearby overheard, their faces shifting from skepticism to empathy. Some even clapped softly, a fragile but real show of solidarity. By evening, every major network declared Aurelius Airlines on the brink of collapse. Anchors used phrases like corporate freefall and a public reckoning unseen in decades. Commentators compared it to historic civil rights moments, when individual acts of dignity forced entire systems to confront their prejudice. Jonathan sat quietly amid the noise, the hum of voices, the buzz of news alerts. He wasn't triumphant, but resolved. He hadn't sought this spectacle, but now that it had come, he would ensure it meant more than just scandal. For the first time all day, the boy in the corner raised his voice, not to his mother, but to Jonathan himself. "Mister," he said shyly, "thank you." Jonathan's lips curved in the faintest smile. "No," he said gently, "thank you for seeing." The reckoning was no longer his alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced, ignored, or dismissed. And, for the first time, the silence was broken. Night fell on Chicago, but the Aurelius Airlines headquarters glowed with frantic energy. Reporters crowded outside, their cameras catching flashes of executives rushing in and out of the tall glass building. The lobby buzzed with the sound of hurried footsteps and whispered speculation. In the 32nd floor boardroom, a storm gathered directors, lawyers, and senior executives seated around a mahogany table, their faces taut with exhaustion and fear. Jonathan King arrived with deliberate calm. Dressed in the same gray suit he'd worn all day, he carried no briefcase, no entourage, just the quiet weight of inevitability. Danielle Moore flanked him, eyes sharp, a stack of documents tucked under her arm. Leah Thompson entered last, her presence steady, scanning the room as though measuring threats. The murmurs stopped when Jonathan pulled out a chair at the head of the table. Though not his designated seat, no one challenged him. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. King, we understand your grievances, but let us be candid, this company is in free fall. Investors are panicking, regulators circling, flights grounded. If we don't stabilize, there will be nothing left to reform." Jonathan leaned forward, his voice even but edged with steel. "You don't need to stabilize the old Aurelius. You need to dismantle it, piece by piece, culture, leadership, accountability, all of it." Martin Crowley, disheveled and pale, slammed his palm on the table. "This is absurd. You staged this circus. You orchestrated this ambush with live streams and hashtags. You want to take what's mine by humiliating the company in public." Jonathan's eyes flicked to him, cool and unflinching. "I didn't humiliate Aurelius. Your culture did. I simply refused to look away." Rebecca Hall's live stream played silently on the large screen, frozen on the image of Jonathan being denied boarding. Beneath it, a ticker scrolled with real-time comments hundreds per second, a tidal wave of outrage and solidarity. The evidence was irrefutable, omnipresent. Danielle placed a folder on the table. Inside are 32 documented complaints of racial discrimination filed against Aurelius in the last 2 years. Suppressed, ignored, or settled quietly. We've also included safety violations linked to executive cost-cutting, deferred maintenance, and intimidation of whistleblowers. You didn't just fail passengers, you endangered lives. A director skimmed the pages, face blanching. "If the FAA sees this, we'll be grounded indefinitely. Criminal charges aren't off the table." Jonathan's voice cut through the silence. "Then you understand why half measures won't save you. You can't just fire a few scapegoats and issue an apology. You must choose collapse under the weight of your corruption, or let me rebuild from the ashes." The room erupted with overlapping voices, some pleading for caution, others demanding Crowley's removal, still others fretting about stockholder lawsuits. Crowley shouted above them, "He's bluffing. He doesn't have the leverage to dictate terms." Leah placed her phone on the table. Screen lit with market data. Shares are down 42% in 6 hours. By morning, lenders will be calling debt. You won't survive another trading day without a plan. And Jonathan King holds the voting block that can swing this board in or out of bankruptcy. The words hit like a thunderclap. Silence followed, thick and undeniable. Crowley's jaw clenched, but his eyes flickered with fear. Jonathan rose slowly, his shadow stretching across the long table. "Here are my terms. 1. Martin Crowley resigns effective immediately. 2. An interim leadership council is appointed, with Helen Voss as acting CEO. 3. Aurelius adopts a reform charter drafted by my office, covering mandatory bias training, independent oversight, whistleblower protections, and full transparency of service equity metrics. 4. Every suppressed complaint is reopened, investigated, and resolved publicly. 5. This board acknowledges, on record, that what happened at Gate C-17 was not an isolated incident. It was the product of systemic rot." Gasps spread across the table. One director whispered, He's asking for the company's soul. Jonathan nodded once. Exactly, because without it, you have nothing left to sell. Crowley surged to his feet. Over my dead body. Jonathan's gaze held steady, if necessary. The chairman's voice broke the tension. Martin, sit down. You've brought us to the edge of ruin. Mr. King is offering a lifeline, however bitter it tastes. Crowley looked around the room for allies, but faces turned away. The same executives who once feared him now feared survival more. His power was gone, drained by the weight of evidence and the collapse of confidence. With a strangled curse, he collapsed back into his chair. Rebecca's live stream, still running from the gate, captured the announcement moments later. Breaking sources confirm Aurelius CEO Martin Crowley to resign amid scandal. Applause erupted in the boarding area as passengers read the news on their phones. Some wept, others hugged strangers. The moment was no longer corporate housekeeping, it was a collective victory. Jonathan remained standing. Do not mistake this for triumph. You are not absolved by removing one man. Every one of you signed off on policies that dehumanized passengers and silenced truth-tellers. If you stay under new rules. If you can't abide them, walk out now. 3 directors stood immediately, gathering their papers with stiff dignity. We won't serve under a hostile takeover, one snapped. Jonathan only inclined his head. Then you won't serve at all. The rest stayed, though unease rippled through the room. Danielle distributed draft copies of the Reform Charter. Leah monitored real-time updates as news of Crowley's resignation sent shockwaves across financial markets. Remarkably, Aurelius' stock stabilized, investors betting on the promise of reform under Jonathan's terms. The boardroom air shifted from panic to reluctant acceptance. The choice had been made. Aurelius would not fall tonight, but it would no longer be the same airline. As Jonathan gathered his things, the chairman addressed him quietly. You've won this round, but rebuilding will be harder than tearing down. Are you prepared for the fight ahead? Jonathan paused at the door. I've been prepared my whole life. The difference is this time. The world is watching. When he left, Danielle and Leah followed, their footsteps echoing down the polished hallway. The future of Aurelius Airlines had just been rewritten, and with it, perhaps, the future of an entire industry. The morning after the boardroom showdown, the skyline of Chicago glittered under a pale autumn sun. Television vans still lined the streets outside Aurelius Airlines headquarters. Overnight, the resignation of Martin Crowley dominated every major network. Commentators dissected Jonathan King's unexpected rise from humiliated passenger to power broker. Some called it corporate mutiny, others called it justice. But to ordinary travelers, it felt like vindication for every indignity endured in silence. Inside the terminal at O'Hare, passengers clustered around flat-screen TVs bolted above the gates. The news ticker scrolled Aurelius Airlines appoints, interim CEO after discrimination scandal. Rebecca Hall, who had streamed the original Borden denial, now found herself given interviews, her phone buzzing with endless notifications. I didn't expect it to go viral. She confessed to a reporter, I just knew what I saw was wrong. Her video had been viewed 60 million times in less than 24 hours. Jonathan sat quietly in a conference room with Danielle Moore and Leah Thompson. Though his face was calm, the toll of the last 36 hours pressed into the creases around his eyes. They think the hard part is over, he murmured. watching the news feed. But dismantling rot is easy compared to building trust again. Danielle slid a stack of prepared remarks across the table. You're expected to address the public in an hour. Markets are hovering, unions are waiting, regulators are circling. You can't just manage perception. You need to anchor them in a vision, Leah added, her tone clipped but steady. And you need to protect yourself. Crowley still has allies. Whispers of sabotage, smear campaigns. We can't underestimate his desperation. Jonathan set the papers aside. The speech will be simple. Not about me. About passengers, employees, and dignity. If Aurelius is to survive, it can't be about protecting the old guard. It has to belong to the people who keep it alive. At 11:00, the atrium of Aurelius headquarters transformed into a press stage. Hundreds packed the floor, cameras poised, microphones lined like a forest. Jonathan stepped up to the podium, no teleprompter in sight. He spoke with measured cadence, his voice carrying both weight and warmth. Yesterday, I was denied boarding because of the color of my skin. I was told I didn't belong, even though I held a ticket like any other passenger. But this is not just about one gate or one employee. This is about a culture that has treated dignity as optional. That ends today. Aurelius Airlines will not continue as it has. We will transform, or we will cease to exist. Every suppressed complaint will be heard. Every employee will be trained, not just in service, but in respect. And transparency will no longer be a buzzword. It will be our lifeblood. This is not a promise from me. This is a mandate from every passenger who has ever been told, in ways subtle or brutal, that they didn't belong. From this moment, Aurelius is theirs. The atrium erupted in applause, though not everyone clapped. A few executives in the back shifted uneasily, their faces tight. Crowley's loyalists were still present, their silence louder than protest. But for the employees packed shoulder-to-shoulder flight attendants, mechanics, gate agents, the words felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. Olivia Grant, the flight attendant who had quietly spoken against bias before, wiped her eyes. Carlos Mendez, the maintenance worker, whispered, "Finally." The speech aired live. Social media lit up with hashtags, "Dignity takes flight" and "Dashed passengers first." Within hours, grassroots groups organized boycotts of rival airlines, demanding they adopt similar reforms. Civil rights leaders praised Jonathan's stance as historic, while industry analysts debated whether Aurelius could realistically implement such sweeping changes. Behind the scenes, the first cracks of resistance widened. Anonymous emails circulated claiming Jonathan had engineered the scandal for personal gain. A tabloid ran a headline, "Power grab masquerading as Justice Crowley's fingerprints were all over it," though unproven. Danielle caught the article before Jonathan's press briefing ended. "They're already trying to spin you as an opportunist," she warned. Jonathan only sighed. Let them. Truth lasts longer than rumors. By evening, Aurelius issued an official rebranding announcement effective immediately. The airline would operate under a transitional name, Phoenix Air. The symbolism was deliberate ashes into renewal. The press release bore Jonathan's imprint, where dignity takes flight. The next challenge arrived swiftly. A live town hall with employees at O'Hare drew thousands. Skepticism filled the air. One pilot asked bluntly, "Why should we believe this isn't another PR stunt?" Another, A baggage handler shouted, "We've heard promises before. How do we know it won't vanish when the headlines fade?" Jonathan didn't flinch. He left the stage and walked into the crowd, microphone in hand. Because this time, you're not excluded from the table. You are the table. Every reform will be monitored by committees that include you pilots, crew, ground staff, mechanics. If the system fails, it won't be hidden. It will be broadcast. And accountability will have names attached, including mine. The crowd shifted. Suspicion softened into consideration. A flight attendant called out, "Then let's start today." "Prove it." Jonathan nodded. "We will, starting with payroll audits. Every disparity in compensation tied to race, gender, or role will be reviewed, and results will be public. By the end of this week, not this quarter." Applause broke through the tension, small at first, then swelling. For the first time, trust flickered. As night fell again, the city hummed with speculation. Could Phoenix Air survive? Could one man's resolve outpace decades of corruption? Jonathan stood at his hotel window, looking down at the glittering streets. Danielle joined him, her voice low. "You realize this isn't just about one airline anymore. If you succeed, others will have no excuse." Jonathan's reflection in the glass looked weary but unbroken. That's the point. We're not just fighting for boarding passes. We're fighting for the right to belong. Everywhere. If that scares them, good. The next day would bring regulators, investors, and unions. But for now, Jonathan allowed himself one breath of stillness. The battle for rebirth had begun, and though the odds were steep, hope was no longer abstract. It had a name: Phoenix Air. 3 days after the rebranding to Phoenix Air, the optimism Jonathan King had ignited was tested. Early that morning, news alerts flashed Phoenix Air Flight 702 grounded in Denver after critical safety failure. Local outlets described smoke in the cabin, panicked passengers, and evacuation slides deployed. Within minutes, video clips flooded social media, shaky footage of people screaming as they scrambled out of the plane. The headlines were brutal. "Phoenix Air Reform Collapses Before It Begins." Jonathan was on the phone with Leah Thompson when the story broke. "I don't buy it," she said flatly. 2 inspections cleared that aircraft yesterday. Suddenly, a critical failure appears today. The weak Crowley loses control. Too convenient, Danielle Moore burst into the room, laptop under her arm. "You need to see this. An anonymous tip claims a fuel valve was tampered with. And guess who was scheduled for maintenance on that jet, a crew supervised by one of Crowley's most loyal managers?" Jonathan clenched his jaw. "Then, we're not dealing with coincidence. We're dealing with sabotage." While regulators launched an emergency investigation, cable networks treated the incident as proof Phoenix Air couldn't deliver. Panelists called Jonathan naive, accusing him of destabilizing an already fragile airline. Stock prices plunged another 9% by midday. The smear campaign Crowley had seeded now bloomed like poison ivy. At headquarters, Helen Voss called an emergency meeting. "We can't survive another day of bad press without answers," she said, her voice taut. "We need transparency, or we'll drown in speculation." Jonathan nodded. "Then transparency will give them. Every inspection record, every maintenance log, every chain of custody, we release it all." The room fell silent. A director muttered, "That level of disclosure could expose us legally." Jonathan's reply was calm but sharp. "Secrecy got us here. Honesty is the only exit." within hours. Phoenix Air's website published every log tied to Flight 702. Buried in the data, Carlos Mendez, the veteran mechanic, spotted anomalies, timestamps altered, signatures forged. He brought the evidence to Leah. Someone tampered with these files after the incident. They're trying to frame this as negligence instead of sabotage. That evening, Jonathan held a press conference. Cameras crowded the hangar where Flight 702 now sat, harmless and silent. This morning, the world saw passengers frightened and fleeing an aircraft. I want to make one thing clear: their fear is real, and we honor it. But the cause was not systemic failure. It was sabotage. We have evidence of intentional tampering, and we're cooperating with federal investigators to pursue criminal charges. Phoenix Air will not cover this up. Not today, not ever. Gasps echoed in the hangar. Reporters shouted questions. Who was responsible? Did Crowley play a role? Was Phoenix Air safe to fly? Jonathan answered only what he could prove. The truth will come out. For now, every aircraft will undergo independent reinspection before takeoff. No corners cut. If flights are delayed, so be it. Your dignity and safety are not negotiable. Passengers watching at home erupted online with mixed reactions. Some applauded the honesty. Others worried the airline was too unstable to trust. The gamble of radical transparency had cracked the narrative of incompetence but hadn't erased the fear. Meanwhile, Crowley resurfaced from the shadows. A leaked recording caught him bragging to a confidant. King thinks he can build an empire on sympathy. But fear spreads faster than hope. All I need is one more incident. The clip aired on an independent blog, quickly going viral. Though unverified, the voice was unmistakably his. Inside Phoenix Air, morale wavered. A group of flight attendants petitioned for hazard pay. Pilots debated whether the airline's survival was worth the risk. Jonathan visited crew lounges personally, not as an executive, but as a fellow human. I won't lie to you, he told them. This fight is ugly, but if we walk away now, the people who built this culture win. You have my word, every effort, every risk we take will be toward something better than what came before. One young attendant, her voice trembling, asked, "And if we fail?" Jonathan looked her in the eye. "Then we fail having fought for dignity. There's no shame in that." The following day, federal inspectors confirmed tampering consistent with sabotage. Though names weren't released, rumors swirled of a network of loyalists still working inside Phoenix Air. Leah doubled security protocols, placing undercover staff in maintenance teams. Danielle coordinated with regulators to fast-track charges, but the attacks didn't stop there. A week later, a story broke in a major paper: Jonathan King accused of misusing company funds. The article detailed supposed lavish spending on hotels, travel, and private dinners. Danielle reviewed the claims, brow furrowed. These are normal business expenses, all documented. They're twisting routine costs into scandal. Jonathan sighed. Crowley is throwing mud, hoping something sticks. Rebecca Hall, still teaching high school by day, used her newfound platform to push back. She posted side-by-side comparisons of Phoenix Air expenses versus those of rival airlines. Jonathan King is being targeted because he stood up. She wrote. Her thread was shared 1,000,000 times, turning her into an unlikely defender. Public opinion seesawed. Hashtags shifted daily. Your stand with King one day, your ground Phoenix the next. The pressure mounted, but Jonathan refused to retreat. If they want a war of attrition, I'll outlast them. he told Leah and Danielle during another late-night strategy session. Then came an unexpected twist. Samuel Wright, the retired pilot who had long stayed silent, reached out. Over coffee in a dim diner, he confessed to Jonathan, "Years ago, I was ordered to falsify a safety report. Crowley threatened to end my career if I refused. I stayed quiet. I regret it every day. But if you're serious about tearing this rot out, I'll testify." Jonathan clasped his hand firmly. Your voice could change everything. The tide, fragile though it was, began to turn. The sabotage exposed Crowley's desperation. The leaks proved the smear campaign, and the courage of people like Samuel, Carlos, Olivia, and Rebecca showed the fight wasn't Jonathan's alone. Still, as he stood before the window of his hotel that night, the city lights sprawling below, Jonathan felt the weight of the struggle pressing down. He whispered to himself, "Not as a CEO, but as a man. How much can one soul carry before it breaks?" But then he thought of the faces passengers clapping in the terminal, Olivia's tears, Carlos's determined eyes, Rebecca's defiance. The burden was heavy. Yes, but it was shared, and that made it bearable. Tomorrow would bring more battles, perhaps worse. But tonight, Jonathan allowed himself a fragile truth dignity had survived another day. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago had never been so crowded. News vans jammed the streets, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters lined the marble steps, jostling for position as if the trial itself were theater. Inside, security checkpoints funneled throngs of lawyers, activists, and ordinary citizens who had come to witness what many called the reckoning of an era. Jonathan King entered quietly, wearing his familiar gray suit, a calm presence amid chaos. Danielle Moore walked beside him, eyes scanning every corner, while Leah Thompson trailed just behind, alert as ever. The trio had become a symbol strategy, loyalty, vigilance. Yet Jonathan carried himself without grandeur. To him, this was not about spectacle. It was about truth. The prosecution opened with stark clarity. They presented the forged maintenance logs Carlos Mendez had uncovered, the voice recording of Martin Crowley boasting of fear as a weapon, and testimony from employees who had endured years of intimidation. Each witness peeled back another layer of rot. Then came Samuel Wright. The retired pilot took the stand, his hands trembling but his voice resolute. For years, I stayed silent because I feared losing everything I had worked for, but silence is complicity. Crowley ordered me to falsify safety reports, to put profit above lives. I obeyed once. I've regretted it every day since. I stand here to say no more. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Cameras clicked furiously. Samuel's words pierced deeper than any document could. For the first time, even skeptics in the gallery leaned forward, believing. Crowley sat across the room, his once commanding presence shrunken. He tried to sneer, to dismiss, but the evidence piled against him was a tide he could not outswim. His lawyers objected, delayed, spun theories of conspiracies, but each tactic crumbled under scrutiny. Jonathan himself took the stand last. The courtroom hushed as he swore the oath. The prosecutor asked gently, "Mr. King, why didn't you walk away? Why endure all this when you could have left Aurelius behind?" Jonathan's gaze swept the room. Jurors, reporters, employees, strangers. His voice was steady, deliberate. Because if I walked away, nothing would change. Because this fight is bigger than me. It's for every passenger who's been told they don't belong. For every employee punished for speaking truth. For my own children, who deserve to grow up in a world where dignity isn't negotiable. I stayed because some things are worth breaking for. His words lingered in the silence. One juror wiped a tear. Reporters typed furiously, already knowing they had tomorrow's headline. The verdict came swifter than expected. Guilty on multiple counts: fraud, obstruction, endangerment. Martin Crowley's face collapsed, rage and disbelief warring with the finality of justice. He was led away in handcuffs, the cameras capturing the fall of a man who once thought himself untouchable. Outside, the crowd erupted. Some cheered, some cried, some simply held their phones high, documenting history. Hashtags surged, "Justice takes flight," "Crowley convicted," "Phoenix rises." But for Jonathan, victory was quieter. That evening, in a modest hall near the airport, he met with employees, pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, gate agents. No cameras, no reporters, just the people who made the airline run. Olivia Grant stood and spoke first. "I didn't believe change was possible, not really, but today proved me wrong. You gave us back our voice." Carlos Mendez followed, his voice thick. "I thought the truth would get me fired, maybe worse. Instead, it helped set us free. Thank you for standing with us." Rebecca Hall, the teacher whose video had sparked it all, addressed the room. "I just hit record because I knew what I saw was wrong. I never imagined it would lead here. But maybe that's the lesson. Change starts when one person refuses to look away." Jonathan listened, hands clasped, a quiet smile softening his tired face. "This isn't my victory. It's ours. Phoenix Air isn't just a company. It's a promise that dignity isn't a privilege. It's a right. We will stumble. We will be tested again, but we will not return to silence. Not ever." Applause thundered, not staged but raw, rising from weary souls who had finally seen the tide turn. Months later, Phoenix Air soared under its new name. Planes repainted with a rising phoenix took to the skies, their slogan stenciled boldly, "Where dignity takes flight." Passengers reported a new atmosphere, crew members confident, policies transparent, accountability real. Regulators praised the reforms as a model. Other airlines, under pressure, began adopting similar measures. Jonathan rarely appeared in commercials or glossy spreads. Instead, he walked terminals unannounced, listening to passengers, shaking hands with employees. He believed the leadership was presence, not publicity. One quiet evening, waiting at gate C-17, the same place where it all began, Jonathan sat watching families board. A little boy tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed at him. "Mom, that's the man from the news." The mother smiled shyly, then approached. "Thank you," she whispered. "Because of you, I feel safe flying again." Jonathan's chest tightened. He nodded gently. "You don't owe me thanks. You belong here, like everyone else." As the plane pushed back from the gate, he exhaled slowly, the hum of engines filling the air. The fight had been brutal, the scars deep, but out of ashes. Something new had taken wing. Phoenix Air was not perfect. Nothing built by humans ever would be. But it was proof that dignity could be reclaimed, that justice could survive turbulence, that hope could ride the winds. And for Jonathan King, that was enough. The story of Jonathan King reminds us that dignity is not a luxury. It is a human right. Too often, people are asked to stay quiet in the face of injustice, told that raising their voice will only bring trouble. But silence feeds the very systems that wound us. Jonathan's choice to stand firm, even in the face of humiliation and sabotage, teaches us that true leadership is not measured by titles or wealth, but by the courage to protect others when it is hardest. For older audiences who may have witnessed decades of change, this story echoes an important truth. Progress is never automatic. It requires persistence, accountability, and the willingness to confront what many prefer to ignore. Whether in the workplace, in families, or in our communities, we each hold the power to choose integrity over comfort, justice over convenience. Jonathan's victory was not just about shutting down an airline, it was about rebuilding trust, creating fairness, and reminding us that hope can take flight again. And if he could stand against an empire, then perhaps we, too, can stand in our daily lives for respect, truth, and the dignity every person deserves. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Your time and attention mean everything. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you stories that matter. Together, we can keep dignity, hope, and justice alive.